Hello, everyone. Yui here, back with another commentary. This time for John Sturges' Black Day. Sorry, not Black Day at Bad Rock. Bad Day at Black Rock. There we go. It's easy to confuse. But I like the other title too.
Bad Rock and
We're
Black Day.
Yeah, Bad Rock at Black Day. There we go. So yes, you can watch alongside me in Chazen by following our little countdown that we're going to do, or you can just listen to it on its own as a podcast. We're going to do the countdown now so you can sick of them. 3, 2, 1, go. A Cinemascope production.
One of the early, I think this was only like the third or fourth movie to use Cinemascope too.
Is that true? Oh, hold on. This is 54. That can't be right. I don't think that's
Yeah.
true. I think that's not right.
No, because I think you, maybe I misread, but
No,
so
because hold on. So you have the robe. You have How to Marry a Millionaire. There's other. No, there's no way. That's not true.
okay. Well, bad on me, I guess.
But yeah, ignorant of your history. Go back to the fucking open the schools. Okay, so yeah, what's your relationship with John Sturges?
So when I was younger, when I was real young, my dad showed me The Great Escape, and I remember loving
Classic
that
dad
back.
movie.
Yeah, classic dad movie. He was a big Steve McQueen guy, as you can imagine. But I remember loving it back then, and I remember being really struck by how many of these characters you knew and loved died at the end. And that was not something I was used to seeing in a lot of movies at the time that I saw it. So I haven't seen it in a long time. I hadn't seen, I think, any of his movies until I saw this for the first time a few years ago, and it was leaving Criterion, and I just instantly fell in love with it. And I'm very excited to be doing this because of that. So this opening credits, I just want to comment on how it has like the opening theme music is like very much like something you would hear in a western, and it's in a classic western landscape, but you're following a train. And I think it's establishing this central theme of like the Western, but in the modern era, and this sort of like commenting on this classical genre very, very well and immediately.
Yeah, well, it's not belabored. It doesn't have to do too much to just visually establish when and where this takes place. Yeah, originally they started the movie off with like this clock motif that was continuing throughout the entire movie, kind of in the vein of High Noon. But a lot of the stuff with the trains was second unit that they picked up afterwards, and I think it immensely helps the movie because, yeah, it just gives it a more propulsive, less, yeah, glacial beginning. You just start off and you're like, "Brr, brr, brr," you get the whole fucking rousing theme music. That was another thing
Yeah,
that wasn't present in the original version of this film before test screenings was that originally there was no score. There was just the Foley sound work and all that, and that was meant to kind of help depict the stark and unforgiving locale. And you still get a lot of that in this movie, like not a whole load of music, but for the music that is there by the composer, I do enjoy it. It's quite. I wouldn't say uh, as warm as a lot of Western themes were around this period. It's not really rousing, but there is like a militaristic. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a musician, but it sounds good.
I really like when Tracy steps off the train. There still hasn't he hasn't had a close up yet, and so I think it's a very interesting and indicative choice to have his first real introduction here be framed in this long shot with like the vast landscape and these mountains. And I think it kind of establishes him as this sort of like classical sort of archetype, like a mysterious stranger who seems to come from like out of the land into this place, and nobody knows who he is.
Yeah, he's a quasi Men in Black type figure in this opening bit because the audience isn't really let in on why he's here until much later in the movie, almost to the end. And I think you like infer a lot of it, but it's never directly stated. See, this is great. Oh my god, these low angle shots, everyone getting up. See, this is just the way Sturges directs this is so glorious. Like this is a perfectly directed film in every single way. There's not a fucking iota of anything out of place, and just the utter minimalism of the town really allows him to make the most out of every single location. You kind of get to know every spot in the town. You know, like you got the hotel, you got the bar and grill, you got the garage, you got the sheriff's place. You know, you really you get a feeling there's a lived-in sense of this is where this is at. And unfortunately, this place doesn't exist anymore. I think they tore up not only the town but the railroad.
Well,
And
Lone Pine is still. I think maybe the buildings aren't there, but the town of Lone Pine is. It's that's still like a place in California. It's just that I guess maybe the buildings aren't there. But I've been to the town of Lone Pine, which is in the same geographic location where this was shot. And you know when he goes outside of the hills and you see like those big rock formations outside of
yeah,
town in the Jeep. Those are the Alabama foothills. So, I've been there. That's right next to Lone Pine. A lot of movies have been shot there.
yeah. Am I
Mine's
wrong
West.
in thinking that like I swear there's like Bud Bedecker movies that are shot there, like
Yes,
among
yes.
those rocks.
But yes, Bud Bodeker shot multiple movies at those rocks. So many movies have been shot up in those hills and around Lone Pine that they actually have their own little film festival every year. And there's a
Oh, that's
museum.
great.
There's a museum there that is devoted to all of the movies that have been shot there. And there's a poster for Bad Day at Black Rock in the museum.
Man, that'd be fucking. I would love to go there someday. That'd be great. I'd love to just visit. Because honestly, I'd probably be surprised at the amount of stuff. But like, it's like I can kind of recognize the landscape now that I've seen enough of these movies. So it just becomes iconographic in its own way. See, I love this, where what's the interesting inversion about this movie is so Tracy arrives in town, and this is like a key motif, I think, for how things are just staged. He arrives in town. He's the one that's moving around. He's the like an unstable searching element, right? He doesn't belong here. There's like kind of a uneasy sense of, whatever. Everyone else is lounging, sitting around, like very much relaxed, right? Everyone has a relaxed posture. There's a command that, Lee Marvin, that Walter Brennan, like everyone here, this is their place. And
Yeah,
as you
yeah.
go further and further into the movie, what ends up happening is you get more and more scenes where Tracy is he'll just be sitting down and everyone will be
Yeah.
moving around him, anxiously
Yes, like
like
at the
pacing back and forth, and he'll just be sitting totally still in a scene. And the contrast of who's sitting and who's standing is a great example of just how to do like simple intuitive blocking, because then when he starts to learn more about what he's here for and what's happened, like this scene too, like this is perfect, where he's Lee Marvin's on his bed, right, kind of taking command of what's going on, and he's been displaced and he has to move to another part of the hotel, and you get this inversion of this later in the film where then you have like other characters who basically start to lose their cool, start to panic, and meanwhile Tracy will just be totally stoic, sitting down, not giving a fuck, and then he lets them come to him, right? Like there's confidence, and it's never obviously it's never like stated in dialogue, but just the simple intuition of like who is doing what in relation to who is so elegant, so clear-eyed, and so precise. Yeah, just watching this movie again, I was just struck by, man, like just the way that Sturges conceives of where to put the camera, what actors should be doing, how they should be doing it, and how the space should be constructed to tell a story, to tell two stories, right? There's a story in the dialogue and there's a story in the visuals. And that you, in a sense, could understand the emotional wavelength of this movie by just, like not having subtitles, not having audio, and just watching the scenes play out. You could understand like who's the aggressor, who's the defender, like what, who's looking for what and where. Like you just would get it all because Sturges is a master when it comes to blocking and like this scene right here. This is a perfect example of
Yeah.
this, where like you get every single thing. It's in wide cinemascope. It's beautiful, totally clear. Everything's in focus. You understand each iota of visual information, and you get to see characters inhabiting an environment like they've been there. This movie has a real sense of these guys live in this town. They're not actors
Yeah.
who are here performing. These are like guys who have lived in this town for all their lives, and they're comfortable. And this is the place where this guy sits, and this is the, you know, like the spot where this guy keeps his alcohol. And you know what I mean? Like there's those tiny details that Sturges just allows to come to the fore because he doesn't, he's not anxious. He's not trying to overclock what the story's doing. It's so patient. It's so reserved, and he just doesn't fuck around. He really. It's like the ultimate example of this type of filmmaking. But even then, there's a lot of filmmakers who actually like developed various permutations of this or that. What I love the most is that Sturges was like the one of this era who really just said like, you know what I'm fucking interested in? Just geometry and choreography.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
like more so than any of his contemporaries, he mastered that to a crazy extent. And this movie is a gorgeous example of like, I don't know, it's like if John Sturges didn't exist, then Cinemascope would have to invent him, or vice versa. There's like a real sense of, I think, because this is like his first scope movie, right?
Yeah,
And
this
he,
was the
he
first
already,
scope.
it's like this is the gold standard how you fucking do it. There's so many bullshit movies shot in scope, quote unquote, shot in 235 or whatever nowadays, and they never have any of the depth or the complexity in how Sturges films this. And
No,
it
yeah,
and it
the two.
drives me crazy because I look at this and I'm like, why would you do anything else when like, here's the example. Here's how you do it. You know, fucking learn from the masters. Like that's what I say. And then you have movies nowadays where it's shot in 235 and everything is like an ultra shallow focus close up of actors'
Yeah,
faces. And
it's
I'm like, get the fuck out of here.
flat
It
and
drives me crazy. Especially like you have TV that's shot in Cinemascope. It's absurd. It's ridiculous. Like, why would you do any of that when this exists? But the thing is, a lot of
no,
people, maybe they don't know this movie exists.
no, yeah. He takes like he always takes like a 40, most of the time he's taking like 45s, which suits like the curve of the aspect ratio. Like you were saying, a lot of modern movies when they shoot it, they shoot things head on very flat. And it's like you have such a like wide aspect ratio. Like you got to take advantage of like the natural it uses single point perspective better than probably any other aspect ratio. So you should do that more often. But so many people just shoot things flat with 235, and I don't know why they do that.
Well, it sucks. I mean, it's a systematic problem where they get taught how to shoot bad coverage all the fucking time. There's no idea of like, what matters in relation to what. It's just shoot close-ups, shoot a wide, and then you're done basically, which is fucking lazy nonsense. And people should, if I was the Stalin of cinema, I would very much be like, all right, if your entire movie is nothing but close-ups, you get your fucking hands chopped off. Like I mean, sorry, I don't want to sound crazy, but it just does make me mad. Like, look at this. Okay, another great motif in this movie, the glass. This movie
Yeah,
is
the
all about glass.
reflections. Yeah, in the
Bec-
glass.
yeah, there's that, and then there's the bottles of glass. There's the Molotov that he makes later. A lot of this movie is about
Mm.
transparency coming into the town and people not wanting to be seen. Things trying to be hidden but being obvious just because of something that all these guys like. Again, when he arrives into the town, you can immediately tell something is off because everyone's acting like
Yeah, and
a fucking paranoid asshole.
that's the ironic thing is that he didn't come into the town with any suspicions at all, and if they had just like acted normal and didn't freak out like that, he probably wouldn't have suspected anything
If
and
they
just
kept their
left not
cool.
knowing anything. Wait, hello?
Yeah, no, if they kept their cool, nothing would have happened.
Yeah, exactly. So there's something almost like Dostoevsky-esque about like them. They almost like especially with Robert Ryan, where there's a point where like he's almost like telling him like what happened, like when, and it's like, dude, like you're. It's almost like you kind of want to kill somebody else and to just sort of deal with this like this just this like self-hatred that this has caused. Like he just can't stop. Like anything from the outside world just reminds him of like this dark secret that's going to stay in the town for forever.
Right. Well, this is a dead place. Basically, this is a fucking wasteland where these guys are just waiting for a reckoning in some ways. And when it arrives, they try to resist it, but the truth wills out. And yeah, it's they can't. But oh, this is a great shot right here. This is so good. This is fucking great. Where we look at all the perspectives we have. We have fucking Walter Brennan on the outside, Robert Ryan and Ernest Borgnine on the inside in the reflection. And then through the reflection, we have the landscape. I mean, and then through that, we have fucking Tracy walking through the landscape. It's just like, fuck, dude. The the depth and the density of what he does here. Yeah,
Like
again,
the
for me,
subtle
this movie is the gold standard for like cinematography, blocking. Like, if
that
you want to know
last
how it's
shot.
done, this is how it's fucking done.
Yeah, the subtle green of the bank safe and like the curtain over the window that was just, but it's just ever so slightly like more colorful than like the monochromatic browns around the other parts of the image. So it just stopped it from being too monotonous and an otherwise very earthy kind of low key look. And it was placed in just the right part of the picture too to like balance out the composition. So. Uh, yeah, no, it's everything is very carefully thought out in terms of what's placed in front of the camera. I love Tracy so much. He's just such a simple actor. Uh,
Yeah, I've been developing more of a relationship with him lately because he's in a lot of George Cukor movies, and he's so
mm,
lovely in them. He's a really there's something he's like a he's a very intransigent actor, and like he's good at portraying the subtleties of simplicity, but also sort of like unconscious depths within a character. I love him in Fritz Lang's Fury. I love him in what is it, Adam's Rib, and what's a kind of similar movie to this actually. Now that I think about it, is George Cukor's Keeper of the Flame, another World War II investigation movie about like the dark secrets in America in relation to the what happened in the war. Although with that movie, it's about like the basically like a World War One hero who's like been turned into a fascist sympathizer. Uh, Whereas this, it's more about like the normality of the town that is like smoothed over a crime that they're all participating in that is based on racial bigotry.
what I love about the the way that this character is introduced versus what you find out about him and who he is later on is that when he first comes into town and the audience doesn't know anything about him, you think he might be a detective or a government agent or a
Yeah,
cop or like someone out of like a noir like kind or something, because this movie's kind of like a noir western hybrid. But then when you find out that he's just a veteran who wanted to say hi to the dad of a guy who saved his life, this movie gets compared to High Noon a lot, but I think there are some certain key ways in which it's the superior picture. And I think one of the key ways in which this guy is like he's not like I mean, he was a veteran, but millions of Americans were veterans. So like he's not like a guy who's like in a particularly like outstanding or like authoritative or sort of like romantic profession. He's just a guy who happens to be caught up in this like very dramatic and powerful story. and he's not coming to save the day. And even then, he tries to leave town a few times when he thinks it's going to be bad. So he is just sort of a guy just responding to the circumstances and then making the right decision, as opposed to like a Gary Cooper in High Noon, who is like a lawman whose job it is to be righteous.
Yeah, well, this one doesn't have a whole lot of rhetorical symbolism, I would say. Like it's like High Noon's a very it's a movie interested in archetypal forces, I think, and in the interplay of these symbols. Whereas this doesn't have a whole lot of that. And I think that's largely because Sturges, again, like okay, like this scene in particular, this is so great. You know, Tracy, he just gets to sit down and Robert Ryan, he starts to fucking basically out himself because he's like, he's like, oh, what makes you upset, and we get a further exploration of that later at the same station where we get this dynamic that starts to explode more and more, and right here, I think, like the way that scene was constructed too, it's like the non like symbolic resonance of the movie. I think that is largely because Sturgis, like, there's like two close-ups of this entire movie, and they're
Mm.
both of like a piece of paper. Other than that, there's really nothing. I mean, this is what I love about Sturgis, that he's so. I mean, he's more reserved than the fucking like silent film directors were. Like he just, there's a part of me that's like, obviously this movie is it's a part of like a post-war classical tradition in Hollywood, and definitely a stage like that. But yeah, there is like a rigor to it that you can see being developed in a different way in other countries, like in Europe and Japan, where like Sturges, he makes action pictures, but the way that he does it, it's like if Ozu was making action movies, right?
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
exactly with like the poetry, but in just like the sheer rigor of the camera, and just like the almost like the icy,
The
like,
silences between words and like
yeah,
the slow.
definitely. And I would also say this idea that like you actually, the withholding, that you actually get more out of what you're doing if you don't do that much. And it's very like the test audiences for this movie originally were like, oh, it's like too slow, you got to speed it up, that kind of thing. When I watch it, I really appreciate that slowness, actually, because the movie is not anxious to tell you about anything, and it actually forces you as an audience member to do the work of thinking through each character's motivation, the backstory, who's doing what to whom and why. Like, you have to participate in the creation of the movie. It's not just the movie imposing itself on you. You have to be a part of it. And I really appreciate that. I think a lot of the best movies do that.
No, I totally agree. Funny, Robert Ryan. I love him as an actor. It's funny how in real life he was, very very liberal. Like was an active supporter of the civil rights movement, and he constantly played racist throughout his career. Like he played more racist and bigots than almost any other actor I can think of. And I mean, you can see why, because he's just got the perfect face and voice, and just sort of he can just do that self-hating anger really really well. So yeah, I just find that very
Well,
funny.
above all, he just, I don't know, like just his presence screams villain. You just, you watch him anything, and you're like, this guy is a fucking bastard.
uh and even when like that shot, which is just conveying like the information of him calling someone, you could have just had a close up and then cut to him running over here. But there's always like, if what's funny about this movie is that on the one hand, it's so big and vast with its cinemascope framing and its negative space, but because the town is so small and there's only so many locations, and as big as the plains are, it's surrounded by mountains on every side. There is still a feeling of being trapped. Like there's a claustrophobia within these big, wide open frames and within these wide open spaces. And that's something that I think is in, and so I think that makes it's funny how this movie can be both very intimate and very epic at the same time through its contrasting use of like interiors and exteriors.
Yeah, I think the claustrophobia is just because Sturges packs his frames with everything, like every single element. It's not bric-a-brac. It's not like Sternberg where he's like putting a bunch of shit in like front of his actors. It's more like, you know, again, like this shot right here. It's like you don't have a shot reverse shot. You just put two actors on two opposite spaces in the frame and have them have a conversation. Like simple stuff, but you'd be surprised that people just were like, no, let's not do that. It's like, but it's so much more efficient and it communicates so much more about, because you not only get the performances, but you get the emotion, right? Like they have their backs to the camera. You could do much more with bodies and the way that they're positioned in relation to each other. And also, you get the context of the landscape. So you get this idea of like, okay, not only who are these people, what are they doing, but the space, right? That's the key thing, and I think
Yeah,
that's what we
they're on the
lose. And I'm not saying like I'm against like the idea of close-ups or whatever. I don't want to go that far because they, that like,
yeah, like
there's few things better that they can, an impactful close-up at the right time that can be great. But I think they have been really overused and abused precisely because they're conceived as like, well, this is how you convey intimacy. Well, actually, no. A close up has more power when you actually don't refer to it that much. And if perhaps Sturges is like he's articulating an extreme with this movie, where it's like we're really showing you the moral problem of that lies between all these characters, right? That lies between them, between the landscape that we never directly see, right? And so
yeah.
to have a close up would almost be like it would belie a sense of uh, importance to a particular element, and you would miss the idea that like what's holding this town together, but in a sense is also making it decay and having this moral
Well,
depravity
you'll
that they've
know
all centered around that.
the way that he stages a lot of the locals, like at the beginning of the scene, when you have the wides where you see everybody in the shot, like they're all gathered in this place to talk the situation. But until Robert Ryan goes to each individual person, they're not standing together. So they're in the same spot talking about something, but they're not actually close. There's like a separation between them because their relationships aren't actually based off of like love or affection. It's based off of power plays and authority. So
Right.
Robert Ryan goes to each person when he wants something from them or to convey something to them, but as a whole, like they're staged apart even though they're all there to talk about the same thing. Like there's a space between all of them. And I think that says a lot about how it may be a small town, but they're not really united except under fear and authority.
Right. There's always a jostling. Yeah. I mean, the way that I conceive of Sturgis cinema is that everything is a chessboard. Everything is a bunch of like all the actors are pieces and they're all moving around in relation to each other. And one character takes something else. There's a advance, a retreat. There's this idea of drama as a series of like tactics and almost it's like holding uh, a power in reserve until you need it, and then deploying it in the precise way that has the most effect, right? I
Mm.
think about so much stuff in The Great Escape where a lot of that movie is just detailing arduous preparation for every single thing they need to do. And of course, like, Sturgis, there's something to compare him to Kurosawa, who he often gets lumped in with. I will say that there is a shared sense of almost like the inevitability of violence, but not the glorification of it. And I would
Mm.
also
Yeah.
say there's an element in which both filmmakers are exceedingly good at like building and building and building suspense, and then releasing it in like quick bursts, right? Not extended fugues or like big chases or whatever, But so much of the Great Escape, I mean, you have like this fucking 3 hour movie, and sorry, spoilers to anyone who hasn't seen the movie, but it's like they fuck up at the end. It's like that's such a great idea, but so rarely do we have movies that actually do that sort of thing. And
Yeah, and
I think
it's
that's the
also
interesting thing about this movie is that it's like ultimately, he doesn't come here and he doesn't like the mystery is a little bit kind of obvious, right? Like he kind of just figures it out, through basic clues. Like yeah, again, we have like the huge burned down building that these guys haven't done anything about in the years since. You know, it's like it's pretty obvious just by existing uh, in the way that it does, on screen, and so like we get it, and nothing has to be said, and yeah, gosh, but I love this bit right here where we go from him
flowers.
being contextualized by the burnt down building and then picking out the flowers, and we get a little cut to the flowers. This is great.
Yeah, it's a little, dare I say, something a little spiritual about to me about like life coming out where death was, and it being like a product of the other. Uh,
Well, I wouldn't really say that about Sturges. I don't think there's anything really
no,
spiritual in his movies, but I can see
no.
like, on its own terms, yeah.
Because like something that to me sticks out about this movie in its context of like the Western and at this point in the genre's history is that there's a speech that Robert Ryan gives about how this we're like economically cut off, and like the people in like the big cities like don't care about us and all that stuff. And so it's funny how there's this plot which is something that could be out of a Western. A stranger comes to town and tries to bring outlaws to justice, but in those westerns which were set during the Old West, they're often in the context of like the idea of progress and civilization and manifest destiny. Like we're going to build something here out of this untamed wilderness. And now you have this movie where it's like, yeah, there's big cities in the West. Like that's not mentioned, but like, as an audience member, that there's big cities in the West now, but this place is like a small Western town that is no longer the front of like the new civilization and like the spearhead of like manifest destiny. Now it's just a relic. Like, so it's almost like it's like an old fashioned story is taking place in a town that feels like it's out of date and that whose time is falling behind. And at least that's something that I get from this movie.
Well, there is a gothic element to it, I think. Yeah, like the idea that, in a sense, that West has, uh, it's like a post-industrial view of the West. It's a West, dare I say, austerity, right? Like there's this idea of like even out here, there's decay where there previously, quote unquote, was nothing. Like that's not true, but at least as far as this town goes, yeah, like this town was erected and now it's been, more or less abandoned. But you almost get the sense that the townspeople have willingly, allowed themselves to be cut off, and
Yeah,
yeah, so it's like kind of complaining about something that you've done, right? Like they're like, oh, no train has stopped here in 4 years. I mean, it almost makes you wonder. It's like, how do you guys survive out here? Like you don't have contact with anything. You're in the middle of fucking nowhere. Like what the fuck? Like where do you? I mean, I guess there's water. Like where do you get your food from? I'm just like wondering all
yeah.
this stuff. I mean, I guess like
And
like Lee Marvin's character. It's like him and Ernest Borgnine. I think like they're farmhands, so I think that's sort of the implication.
well, when you talk about how like it almost feels like it's a choice to cut themselves off from the world, like, that's like the contrast between like a small town in this movie and a small town in like a Ford movie, where like a Ford sees like a small town as like the heart of like humanity and like a place of community, whereas in this small town it's like a mini fascist dictatorship. It's ruled by cronyism, by just one powerful guy getting a few dudes to boss everybody around. And so I feel like there's kind of, and relate with its relation to racism and this character having fought fascism, It's like this movie's like saying like, hey, well, guess what? There's little, you know how like this guy fought fascists abroad, where there's little mini fascists and like little mini dictatorship in little towns all over America.
Yeah, it really depicts the semi-feudal way that some of these places exist, where they are in forgotten corners and no one really gives a shit, so they're allowed to do whatever. And there's like a stifling conformity that sets in, especially a conformity that is bracketed by violence. There's okay, what was I about to say? There's an element to this film that I think is like, how do I describe it? It is in a sense almost, it's like a morality play, but what I like about it is that like you could never have this in any like, oh god, I love how like dusty his fucking suit is in this scene. It's so good. Like he just gets run off and he's just covered in fucking dust. Oh, it's terrible. Yeah, but like what's great about this is that like the use of repetition in the locales, just returning to these places again and again, it gives you a real sense of familiarity with them, which I don't think you could easily get in other art forms. I think this is a key thing about cinema is that because it takes place in space but depicts temporal events, you actually end up getting a layering and a compounding, an understanding of like what you're talking about. You end up understanding character and society through space and environment. And like with Ford, right, so much of that is about rising and falling communities, or this idea of what an ideal is, and what's the ideal form of love and family and all that. Like that shows up again and again. Whereas here with Sturges, you get the sense that America is in this. I think this is like a key. Like Sturges, he's a post-war filmmaker. He starts out making stuff in the 1940s, and that whole era of America has this like great big happy family, or at the very least like a place of families struggling together. I mean, like there's not really any family in this movie. It's just like this alliance of all these isolated people against the world, and in that way it is like profoundly cynical about like what human relations are, that everyone is sort of looking out for themselves, and the way they look out for themselves is by sort of covering each other's asses against the larger world, which may impose stuff like law and morality upon them. And it shows like like what you can get away with when you've got people who are all sort of, they don't even have to be coerced. They can just like the looking away from a problem is almost as worse as deliberately like consenting to it in the first place. Just by saying like, oh, it's not my problem, but it's like, well, but it is your problem when you're covering someone else's ass for it.
Though I will say that I think this movie going off of what you're saying, and again contrasting it with High Noon. In High Noon, he tries to convince everybody to help him, and nobody does, and so he goes off to face the bad guys at the end by himself until his wife comes in at the last minute and shoots that guy. Whereas in this one, I think it is less individualistic than High Noon, because at the end he does get some help from Walter Brennan and then the hotel clerk who decides to go
Yes, and
against
that
Robert
that feels a
Long.
little bit like Rio Bravo. This is before that movie, but yeah, like the element to which, yeah, like the it's like the doctor's the only one who like, at least like the first one to really be in his corner. Yeah, no, there is that. I mean, well, it's almost as if like Tracy walking in, he just before the question of morality has been worked out by everyone here, and then he reignites that, and he like ends up picking at that scab. Then everyone has to ask themselves what their position is in relation to this question, and the whole movie is about people kind of moving around the question and deciding their own answer of like what they're gonna do with it.
Yeah, and this repetition again. Uh,
I see. I love this stuff. I love movies do this. I love like I love films that when you're done with them, you feel like, oh, that place, like I could go there. Like that's a real place. Like I could walk there.
Hmm.
Like just movies that, especially like stuff like this, which takes place over like a single location almost entirely. It's it really communicates, I think, the texture and honestly, even I would say like the it's like what does the landscape communicate cinematically of like a town in the middle of the desert? Like what are the things that could be extrapolated from that? This movie goes a long way towards trying to explore all those ideas. And like I think a lot of the best cinema is like taking ideas and exploring them through time and space.
Because it's only 82 minutes, but it
Oh,
feels
that's
longer than that.
crazy. That's so crazy.
Yeah,
By the way, the fact this movie is 82 minutes, that's fucking bonkers. How the fuck?
yeah, but
What
it
the hell?
feels longer in a good way because it's packed with so much character and with so much detail. So, yeah, like you said, there is still action, but it's in like short bursts, and that's also not only do I think it's more dramatically effective, it's also more true because like when violence does happen, most of the time, it's usually just this short, awkward thing that doesn't go how anybody planned it, and you don't even know what you're doing, and then as soon as you realize it's happened, it's over already. Like it's not like I mean, I love like choreographed stuff like kung fu, but that's a different like if you want violence to really like you know like actually feel like oh shit this is a real thing, it should be in like just short awkward bursts.
Yeah, well, I think that's it's like we talk about quote unquote what is an action movie. I think it's a movie where I think violence or the just physical destruction takes a center stage. And I think when you have like a martial arts film, it's less about I mean, it's like it's a depiction of violence, but it's ultimately a dance movie. It's a musical movie. It's a
Yeah,
movie
yeah.
about, characters like moving back and forth and highly choreographed routines and
It's
that's
about
great.
the art of the body.
Yes. Whereas this here, I think, is much more about this idea of like ultimately what does it come down to solve a moral problem, and what does a confrontation actually entail? And I think it's like there's all this talk and all this bluster between all these guys and all the line they do. And what does it come down to? It comes down to a guy getting his neck, fucking karate chopped. And it comes down to, Robert Ryan having his fucking back set on fire. Like it, in a sense, Sturges is like a very materialistic filmmaker in that, like what solves problems in his movies is just like a basic exchange of energy. There's not this idea of we can solve things through rhetoric or like the answer to this movie is some idea or some emotion. It is very much like things are resolved in the Sturges world through like moving through a space, through something changing physically, and like at the end when Tracy gives Walter Brennan the medal back, it's like this town can only continue to exist if they have something to build off of, something good, which is the medal that the son earned when he was in the war in Italy. And there's this idea that like this town would just cease to exist if it didn't have like that medal. And I think that is like like Sturges is a materialist in that way. I think about
Mm.
also his movie The Law and Jake Wade, which was made up a few years after this. Also another amazing Cinemascope movie. It's basically his version of a Bud Bedecker film, but the
Hmm.
whole climax takes place in this dilapidated ghost town. And Sturges is very good at these ghost town places, at these places that are kind of like, because he doesn't really frame it in a gothic way. This isn't. It's not an expressionistic movie at all,
No.
but it does. He's good at depicting like basically just like zones in which zones in which problems are solved. It sounds pretty basic, but like, he's able to like take a town like this, like Black Rock, or the town in Law and Jake Wade, and I would even say the climax of, oh god, what's the movie that I just watched?
Did you just watch Escape from Fort Bravo?
Yes, that's one. Yes, Escape from Bravo. Yeah, the ending of that, where it's just this huge extended action set piece just in the middle of the fucking desert. Like Sturges, he's very good with these bare places. I think about the town in Magnificent Seven too. You know, it's like the bareness of it, and this idea of like this is a place of life that has been made kind of unlivable by circumstances. This is the thing that Sturgis, and I guess like a prison camp in a sense, like in what is it, The Great Escape is similar to this as well. Yeah, like he's really good at exploring the implications of these environments.
Well, in regards to him being a materialist, something else I really appreciate about this movie is that through a few things that, what Ryan says about the background with him and the Japanese family is that the script, by Millard Kaufman explores a material basis for some of these racial resentments because like he sold him this land thinking it was worthless, and then when he finds a well and he makes the land valuable, he starts to hate him. And then Ryan was rejected by the draft board for being unfit, and then the Japanese man's son got accepted. So there's also resentment because of like not being able to like fulfill like the socially obligated patriotic duty. So like he really explores like actual like material and like social bases for racism, which I really appreciate, rather than it just being some sort of just vague, I just don't like him for no reason, the way that it is in some of these movies at the time. So I think that I
Yeah,
like that
it's not
material
it's not
aspect of it.
considered it's not considered like a an outpouring of just excess, right? There's an idea here that because I think it's shown that like when it was done he was drinking, right? But it's like the drinking allowed him to essentially act out what he was already feeling, and in a sense everything else has been this like attempt to do damage control on that one night. Oh god, when I look at all the insides of these places, like look inside here, there's fucking coffins in the background of there's like these old school coffins that are just sitting there in his doctor's office. Oh god.
Walter Brennan, do you know how he got that voice? Because he didn't always have it.
No, I mean he's had it in every movie I've seen him in. When did he
Well,
have it?
yeah, it was before he even did movies. He was in the artillery in World War One, and he got a mustard gas attack, and it got in his vocal cords. So ever since then, his voice got all high and squeaky.
Wait, for real? Wow, that's crazy. Holy shit. God. Well, is it wrong to say I'm kind of thankful for that? I
Well,
mean,
no, I mean, I think he had a similar attitude because he also said early in his career there was an accident on a movie set where like they were doing a group brawl and a guy accidentally kicked him in the mouth and knocked out all of his teeth. But what happened was he
ooh.
got false dentures after that. But he said when I took my dentures out, I could look 20 years older. So they started casting him as like an old man specialist when he was, not yet an old man even, and that's when his career really started turning around. So, yeah, I bet he would probably have a similar attitude about the mustard gas. So, I guess you're not entirely bad for being thankful that it happened.
Yeah, that's a crazy thing. Walter Brennan's one of those actors where it's hard for me to imagine like him not being old. Do you know he feels like just a guy who was born old and he's eternally been old. He's just like everything has just perspired in the universe to conceive of Walter Brennan as an archetype that has existed in American movies. Like so much riffs off of him in terms of jokes, in terms of whatever. It's almost like people don't even know what they're referencing, but they know the Walter Brennan type character.
Yeah,
And
like the old prospector voice. That whenever
yes,
anyone does,
exactly. There's
yeah,
gold
whenever
to them
anyone,
hills.
yeah, they're just doing a Walter Brennan. I also miss like this movie. I mean, this movie's got like just one of the great stacked casts of character actors of any movie in the
Oh, it's
50s.
absurd.
And I just really miss these just totally non-beautiful like supporting character actors that you used to see in movies all the time. And like even a lot of thugs in movies are like pretty good looking these days. Like,
I
you
know.
know,
I hate that shit. I hate how every fucking like bad guy now looks like a GQ model. Fuck off. It's so boring. Most boring shit. Give me some guy that looks like a weird dude from like he exists in a dive bar. Give me that motherfucker in your movie. I don't want to see this like oh my god, he's in an impeccable tailored suit and he combs his hair and like all this like fuck you. That sucks. It's boring. Uh, yeah, but this I mean the cast of this movie. It's kind of everyone at the right time in their career. You got Robert Ryan, who's just coming up. I think is this before or after on Dangerous Ground? I feel like
this is after on
this
Dangerous
is
Ground.
after. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. So he's doing that. I think he in the same year or around this time he's doing Fritz Lang's. Oh God, what's the movie? Clash by Night.
Flash by Night.
He's
Yeah.
doing that, which is a great film. He's doing that, and you got Lee Marvin, who is now just like for a long time in his career just playing heavies. I haven't seen the movie where like he kind of graduated into being a leading man, but he was pretty late. But Lee Marvin, I mean, he's one of the great
Yeah.
actors. He's
Oh
he's
yeah.
he's just a great like stupendously imposing man.
I had a
I mean,
teacher.
God,
I had a director in drama school who has a funny story about Lee Marvin. So I was for my final show, I was directed by a guy called Nicky Henson. He was an experienced British actor, been in a bunch of stuff. He had a small part in Syriana, but he met Lee Marvin when he was a very young act. Well, not Lee Marvin, but when Nicky was a young actor, he met Lee Marvin at a party. And he loved Lee Marvin. Like he thought Lee Marvin was a brilliant actor. So he goes up to him and talks to him, and he's like, "I'm a huge fan." And he's like, how why are you such a great actor? Like, how did you become so good at acting? And Lee Marvin just looks at him and goes, "Well, about 50 shit scripts."
yeah, that'll do it. That'll do it, wouldn't it?
Yeah, no, because it's true though, because like you gotta, like that's the real test of an actor is how can you be good even if the script sucks. So, actors back then did dozens and dozens and dozens of movies. So, that's how you just learn the ropes. Even if it sucked, you just kept on doing it until you
I
got
think
good.
I think that's something that has been totally lost nowadays. Is that the floor has fallen out for a lot of performers, where you get two shots, and then you're done. Like, you don't have this idea of being a contract player where you could kind of stick around and learn the ropes. It was an apprenticeship. Ultimately, like a lot of the Hollywood studio system for actors was apprenticeships. For directors too. For so many people, there
Yeah.
was like an actual system where you could learn a trade, and it was a useful thing. You could learn how to, yeah, like and like you could be a cinematographer, and then you could light, for photographs and stuff. Like it was something that I think provided you with like a great set of skills. And for actors, you would learn to sing and dance, and you would learn how to like to like kind of stand, and like not only stand for a camera and to act for a camera, which is a different thing from acting from the stage, and to like cultivate your voice and your persona. Like there was this whole thing, and now all of that is gone. I mean, no one has that shit anymore, and it's you know, not all of it was perfect. There was some fucked up stuff that happened, but when you look at a guy like Lee Marvin, he got a lot of chances, he's like, what's cool about him is that he gets to be in a lot of movies like this where he's not in the center, but you're glad that he's here, and it's just nice that he's here. And that doesn't happen a whole lot anymore. There's not a whole lot of stuff where it's like, oh man, that guy who had a small part in this, now he's doing this. I mean, you know, I don't know. Like, I
No, it
struggle to
happens
think of a
very
lot of the
rarely.
time that that happens now. It feels like now, stars are either like more or less instantaneously jettisoned into a franchise. They get to play Paul Atreides or whatever, and then now they're a star, or they just remain stuck as so and so forever. But even then, yeah, like it's I don't know. I think it's a bit of a tragedy that we don't have
Like in a
these apprenticeships, these communities where people can basically learn from the best. And there is an idea of like, oh yeah, like like we are in a workplace together. That's now that production in Hollywood has been shipped off over the entire globe into into Georgia and to Canada and to fucking England. Like you don't really have that anymore. It doesn't exist.
No, yeah, it's very all atomized and all cut up in little pieces.
Which
Well,
is the way that the fucking money men wanted, of course.
yeah, exactly. Well, Tracy, he had like, before his first hit movie, he starred in like 20 flops in a row, but like Fox just kept giving him a chance because they thought that he was like the best actor around. So, if they probably wouldn't do that now. Like if he had one or two flops, he'd be done.
Well, yeah, you'd be done, and then 20 years after you've quote unquote retired, Christopher Nolan will cast you as a bit part in his movie because he liked you in something. It's like that's your trajectory. It's such a weird way to be a performer, and it's honestly it's just kind of not feasible. I don't like it's just a broken system. It doesn't work anymore. See, this is so great though. This is okay.
Yeah, I'm saying this is so
This
bad.
Yeah, this is like so Christopher McQuarrie loves this movie. He's obsessed with this film, and you can see like a ton of McQuarrie stuff in a movie like this where again like the idea of like these frames always having like density of information, but
Yeah, like that
also
red box drawing your eyes right to the midground.
yes, but then also this idea of like like a type of character like look at this scene. Like this scene is like a scene out of Jack Reacher, like the Tom Cruise version where he very much is like just gets pushed and pushed and pushed and he's like, all right, you want to do this, you want to dance, like okay, let's dance, like like these there's this I don't know, I always loved it. Like this stuff never ages for me, like this type of scene like where it's just like one guy pushing so hard that it's like, all right, dude, you're asking for your ass to be kicked right now. I mean, for me, it works all the time.
Well, Yoy, a good man is not a man who is incapable of violence. A good man is a man who could be violent, but chooses not to be.
Do you know who I was just being just now?
No, you're gonna have to tell that to me.
I was being I was being fucking Jordan Peterson. I brought that up because it's hilarious that he makes that quote when he looks like he would get broken in half if he got hit like one time by like a normal dude. So someone being pushed to violence just reminded me of that. But anyway, sorry to impersonate a horrible, horrible man in the middle of this commentary.
Yeah, don't worry, I'll just edit that out. Don't worry, listener, you never heard any of that because I edited it out, so don't worry. I love details like this, like the sheriff. He's got his boots off, and he's just like got his socks on the carpet of the hotel. I love stuff like that in movies. It's great detail. Look at this here in the background. See, this is why everything needs to be in fucking focus. This is why I'm obsessed with movies. Fuck your shallow focus. I want to see everything. I want to see it all. Because in the background behind Robert Ryan, that you can see in full clarity in 35 millimeter, glorious 35 millimeter Cinemascope, there's this little like drawing or sketch of a cowboy, like riding a horse or like breaking a horse, and it's like, it's framed right next to the door, and that speaks to what you were talking about earlier. This idea that, like, the West has, now here been sort of calcified, and now it's decaying, right? We're in a post-industrial landscape of the West where those rules don't abide by anymore. And like and in the dialogue, it's reflected too, where he says, like, I thought the morality of the West was courtesy and hospitality, and like, obviously that's not the case here, but we do get that idea that, like, this place doesn't really exist in the way that it should at all.
And out exterior environment is also visible even in a lot of the interior shots. So there's always a
It's so
even in
good.
the intimacy of the interior, there's a reminder that, like, there's a vast empty nowhere outside of this intimacy. So even when you're inside, you're still reminded of like the West. So I love that it's always there.
But it's also, I mean, again, there's this whole push after the war for Hollywood movies to use more location shooting, and Sturges makes the most of that. Really, like, almost all this movie is just they built this fucking town and they shot in it. Like, I mean, it's a great example of, like, him being like, yeah, if we built a hotel, why don't I, we're gonna see the mountain range in the windows. Like, just making the most of every single thing. It's all great. And I just, like, yeah, like, that ruthless economy of not only action and character, but landscape and just everything. It's God, it just means a lot to me, because I don't take this stuff for granted. I think there was a time in which I would watch something like this and be like, oh, it's all right. But now that I've seen, like, the dregs, just the absolute worst of the worst, I've seen so much garbage over the course of, just watching thousands of movies. I know that, like, this stuff is rarer than it should be. And so when I do see a movie that has this level of clarity and precision and mastery, yeah, it's impossible for me to look at it and be like, and to not be able to appreciate it more for what it is than how I used to, where I was just kind of like, oh yeah, it's a neo western. It's like, nah, dude, this movie is, it's important. This movie should be respected. It's a part of a canon that I think ultimately, like, has fallen by the wayside. And and what I hope is that someone listening to this commentary, I mean, they'll probably already like the movie, right? But that perhaps they'll gain some more appreciation for it in the way that I've started to have for movies like this too, where it's like, it's not super ambitious. It's not like trying to be the biggest thing in the world, but in its own narrow purview, it achieves a total command of all the faculties of cinema. And I think that's worthy of admiration and respect. Like, this whole little bit here where he takes out the bottle that he was going to drink with his friend's father, and he's like, he's contemplating it, and then he gives it to the fucking kid, the hotel clerk, and he's like, you're gonna need it more than I. Like, it's just this great stuff, but that's not spoken. You know what I mean? Like, it's not made into rhetoric by the dialogue or the script. It's just this
No,
wonderful little detail that
no.
emerges from the logical consequence of the character and the scene, the story, the environment, all of it working in perfect harmony and unison.
And with Spencer Tracy, when they ask him, I think, what's your profession, he just very, very simply says, like, I'm retired. And I think he says something like, I'm not sure where I'm gonna go. And so with just those few words, you can tell that he's been, like, deeply affected by his experiences, which is another, like, noir trope of the disaffected World War II veteran. But, like, again, it's not belabored upon. It's just a couple lines,
Yeah. Well,
and
he
it just
he also talks about how, like, after this he was, like, planning to go to, like, the, like, just, get out of America and go to, like, the South Seas and, like, explore islands and stuff, which is almost like it reminds me of, like, the Michael Mann, like, guy who wants to just be in the ocean. He just wants to, like, in Collateral, you got Max, who's got his little photograph of the island that he keeps, reminding himself that like, oh, someday I'm gonna, go here. This is gonna be my future.
Yeah, it's like Private Wit and like the Thin Red Line. Like you've seen so much in like World War II that he kind of wants to return to some sort of like innocent sort of paradise untouched by
Yeah.
civilization. But in this movie, Spencer Tracy realizes that maybe he can escape this stuff, that like maybe this is something that we all just have to deal with. That like this is just something which is just gonna it's a part of life,
Have
and
you seen the John Borman movie? Oh God, what am I slipping my mind? Not War in the Pacific. What is it? Hell in the
oh, Hell in
Pacific.
the
Have you
Pacific.
seen that?
No, I haven't. That's Lee Marvin and Toshiro Mifune, right?
Yeah. Well worth checking out. Sort of adjacent to what you're talking about there. Like very much a cool, again, another movie dealing with the war, but yeah, it's like basically a silent movie. It's just Lee Marvin and Toshiro Mifune yelling at each other for fucking 2 hours and trying to survive and trying to escape this desert island. It's one of the great premises of all time, and John Borman shoots it with such beautiful naturalist beauty. I mean, it's just a gorgeous movie. And also, like this, it has like a great unity of character and landscape. Like there's just nothing extraneous in this film or that.
Hate to ruin Walter Brennan because I love him as an actor, and I normally wouldn't bring this up to be a killjoy, but I am bringing this up specifically because of the subject matter of this movie. So this movie is all about, like it's a story against prejudice and about how horrible prejudice is, and it's very ironic because Walter Brennan was a deeply, deeply prejudiced man. Uh, he was a member of the John Birch Society. Did you know that?
Oh, for real? Wow. Yeesh. Ay, ay, ay. It doesn't surprise me, but yeah, I mean, well, it does surprise me, but I guess I shouldn't be surprised. But, ugh, God.
Yeah,
Well, he
apparently.
was on set. I know that he and Tracy fucking hated each other because, like, Tracy, like, he and Katharine Hepburn were always close, and like all the HUAC stuff was going on during this time, and like Brennan made a joke about it, and Tracy was very much just like, "All right, don't joke about that shit," basically.
Oh
Also,
yeah,
they were doing this like bullshit where like Walter Brennan was like, "I won 3 Oscars, you only won two," like that type of thing. That was like, yeah, this movie's production didn't sound great, even though like the movie itself has this crystalline quality to it. It seemed like it was a contested space, and also like just shooting this out in like 110-degree weather. That very much seems like hell.
yeah, and Tracy was in pretty poor health by this point, so I imagine it was not. I mean, a lot of it. He did not have fun on shooting movies the last decade or so of his life because he was in such bad health. He was a bad alcoholic. Like I think there was a Fox movie where his contract almost got ended because he was late for a shoot and they couldn't find him. And after a few days, they found him like unconscious in his hotel room after a 2-week binge. So
Hey.
yeah, he had his issues for sure. Uh, but yeah, I think after when he did his last movie was Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. I think he died 17 days after the production of that movie ended.
Wow.
Uh, so yeah, I think the insurance for that was very, very expensive because he was so in such bad health.
Yeah. I'll tell you. I've made so much of my life about watching movies. Would never want to be an actor. Never, 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 never,
No,
never in
yeah,
my life. Much less a movie star, but never an actor. It seems like not a fun time at all. Like I'm much more interested in like it's like all right, being a cinematographer or being a director. That's like all right, we can have some fun here. We could compose some images, make things pretty. If you're an actor, man, I don't know. Like there's something you're just it seems to there's something mercurial about it. Like it attracts a sense of dissolution and danger, and self-destruction. I think there's so many stories about actors being, yeah, self-destructive behavior, you know, insanity, addiction, all that stuff. I
Well,
mean, you know, I mean, it's just endemic to the human species, I suppose. But like, for actors in specific, it not that like their profession is the hardest thing in the world, but yeah, I've never. There's not a whole lot of actors who I've heard talk about like, oh man, we had such a great time all the time. Like it's, yeah, I don't know. It's maybe I'm just like thinking about a narrow
well, no,
set of them, but
it's ups and downs, like you tend to not have, if you want to make a living, you tend to not have as much control over like the type of projects that you do, unless like, you get really lucky early on, or if you just make the right relationships. And like, I also think there's just a weird thing with acting, because like with all art, you're putting something of yourself out for others to observe, but like there's still it's still projected onto an object separate from yourself, like if you direct a movie, yeah, you're putting yourself into it, but the movie itself is a separate object from you. Whereas when you're an actor, even if you're playing a character, it's you that is the object
yeah,
of
there's
being
because there's no
watched.
difference between you and the representation. It's not like when you know, it's like say like an artist could, you know, theoretically do a portrait of themselves, but it would still be a perceptual distortion, right? Whereas with film, you know, again, like you have this Bisonian realism that's inherent to the medium, and so like, when you can never stray too far from the fact that your personality, your real life existence is necessarily like a little bit implicated in whatever you do on screen. And I think for some actors, it encourages them to be like pretty bold and brave. And for some, I think it encourages like a hyper meticulous, conservative, almost paranoid relation between themselves and their persona. I mean, we know about this all the time. So I love this bit where he's like, "I'm not gonna hit you with a stick. I'm gonna hit you with the fucking fire hose." I mean, it's a great idea for a scene because you're like, man, in what other movie does someone get hit in the face with a fire hose?
Yeah, and it's just also just, it makes it like, how many times have you seen a guy hit someone with like from behind, and it's just, just makes it stand out from the pack. Little details, like, like you were saying, you can't believe it's only 82 minutes. Well, that's why I think details like that, the fact that it took the time, out of the story to like emphasize just that moment, which isn't strictly quote unquote necessary from like a mechanistic point of view, but it just adds texture to the story, so it feels much more dense than an 82-minute movie would suggest, because like it's taking
Right.
the
Great
time
point. You know, yeah,
really.
texture is king above anything else. Like if with my own film work, like what I'm hoping to achieve is just I want texture. I want there to be like I want the image to feel like you can kind of like rub your hands on it, like a granite surface. You know, like I want that feeling. A lot of my favorite stuff, yeah, just like I think all the time about you know that famous scene in Tarkovsky's Stalker where like the camera drifts over the water and you get like these old photos and like the like a fucking like a machine gun and like you get the sense of like history over the eons that is contained within the movement of the camera reflected in this like tiny little pool and like you got these like drifting detritus of human existence and nature all being contained within this one shot. Like that sort of thing, I adore that. And it's like the principle behind that image, I think, should be the principle behind all images. If you can, you know, make a movie that is filled with that kind of stuff, you're kind of set, right? You're kind of good to go. I think all the time about how like Howard Hawks does that stuff with gestures, right? The way his characters move in his
Mm.
movies, it's all textured. It's all, you know, the way they throw guns or the way they, you know, light cigarettes. It's all very meticulously done. Speaking of Hawks, by the way, one thing this movie does quite a bit, it's basically invisible unless you're looking for it. It does something that Hawks does all the time, which I'm a big fan of, where if you're going to do like, decoupage like in this classical mode and have it to where, you're moving the camera around in relation to who's speaking and, doing what, instead of doing just shot reverse shot, what he actually does in several of these scenes is that he'll put the camera in the position in like a POV shot of where one of the characters will be instead of doing it over the shoulder, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
but he'll never go back and forth between it, but he'll like subtly just insert it, and it actually has a huge impact. He'll often do it. Sturges, he'll do it at like the beginning of sequences where, say, like Robert Ryan will come up to Spencer Tracy, and we'll see Ryan from Tracy's perspective, like where he would be sitting. The camera is there, and then from there, like then we cut, between them, and sometimes we'll get the reverse of that, right? But I think it's a really great way to communicate space and the position of like perspective. But it's not like nowadays where you have like, oh, POV means like the camera has to move around like it's in a video game and you're like, you're playing Call of Duty and like it's not about capturing the embodiment of like a space, but it's about like understanding everything in relation to each other in an invisible, unobtrusive way, which the
Yeah.
audience can recognize, but it's like you understand it without having to think about it, which I think is so key to the construction of a film like this, where so much of it is understated, but entirely legible in a very clear way, so that you're never confused, even though he's doing these very subtle, like, and pretty smart things when
Well,
it comes down to it.
yeah, what you compared Sturges in a weird way to Ozu earlier, and what you just said about the insertion of a POV shot within larger spatial relationships and not having that POV be like a part of a shot reverse shot. Like I just saw Tokyo Twilight last night, and there was a lot of that. And even when there was a shot reverse shot, it was never over the shoulder. It was always just directly facing the characters and them looking straight into the camera. But then, they would often cut from those to like a shot of the characters from like outside the room, from like a doorway. So like there's a,
Yes.
even when there's a subjectivity, it goes back to reminding you of the larger picture and their relationship to the space.
But
So there's
also
a
the subjectivity is not portrayed as such. You know what I mean? Like it's not as if like the way that things are being depicted suddenly is altered from the presence of a POV shot. It's imminent to within the space, right? So the characters
Mhm.
conceive as an extension of the environment rather than like this idea that when you have like a POV shot, suddenly things get a little bit wacky and oh my god, the camera's kind of shaking around. Like I'm so tired of that shit. That shit is the most boring stuff in the world to me. And like I very much love, yeah, just like very, again, like the old masters, Ozu, Hawks, Sturgis, they understood this. They understood that you could get away with a lot of these little things that are very clever. You didn't have to draw attention to them, and because you didn't have to, it actually proved to be more effective, I think, in the long term, because it made their films have this robust, tight, taut strength and this resilience that, a film like this, it hasn't aged at all. You could make like an exact shot for shot version of this movie today, it would still be perfect. Like you wouldn't have to change anything really, and it would still
yeah,
work on a
and it
conceptual level. And I feel like that, that's the sign of something great, is when the construction is that solid that you can really say like, okay, I mean, because in a sense, you could even like go to a different period of history. You go to like different time places, like in the past, and have this type of story, and it would essentially not change at all.
yeah, and it just sucks that like because there's no excuse to like not make these types of movies because like this movie's so beautiful, but like it probably, I mean, you could make it today and like it probably wouldn't be that expensive because of the limited locations and like the action scenes are exciting, but they're not like super elaborate. So and not on top of the beauty of Sturgis's long shots and blocking within the choreography, they're also efficient because while you do have to plan them, because like they just involve less coverage, that's less setups that you have to do. So it's
Exactly.
efficient as well as being beautiful. It's also
Yes,
practical.
I entirely agree. It's again we need to go back to this type of stuff because this whole idea where everything needs to be a crushed close up of everything. Again, like the bane of my existence is like the idea of coverage. Like, I mean, what a load of nonsense that is. Like this idea of like we need to shoot coverage for everything. What do you mean you need to shoot coverage? You don't know what your shot's gonna be. You need to rely on a fucking formula to know like what you're shooting. No, go into a space. Ask yourself, how do I tell a story in this space? And then tell it with the camera. Like, make choices, make active choices. Don't repeat yourself with a fucking formula that was derived, in the hands of, some like people who were working in TV who just needed to like communicate something in the most, like bare bones efficient way possible. You don't need to do
Oh
that.
yeah,
Just apply a bit of thought, and actually you'll end up doing less work. It'll look better. It'll feel better for the viewer, and you'll thank yourself later because you'll be saying, "Oh man, because I did that work, now I actually know what I want to do in a better way for my next project." And with Sturges, you could tell, throughout his like this first, dozen films or so, he was really working his way up to saying like, okay, this is what I want. This is how to do it. This is how to do it in an efficient way. And like, how do I? He developed his mastery over time, and because of that, because he was allowed to make his mistakes, you get a movie like this where it's like his first Cinemascope movie, and it's just again immaculate, perfect, not a hair out of place. Everything works, and I fucking love this movie. It's gorgeous, and poignant, and well made, and well cast, and it's just about everything that you could ever ask for.
yeah, it's definitely one of my absolute favorite American movies of the 1950s. And yeah, I wish there were more like just not just these types of movies, but also just like short movies, like short genre movies. We need
Hmm.
more of them.
Well, that's my opinion. A movie should either be 90 minutes or below, or it should be 3 hours plus. That's my take.
Well, it was a pleasure having y'all listen to us.
Was it though?
Well, I mean, only they can decide that. We can't decide it for them.
No, but no, we can't. We can't decide it for them. You're wrong, Chazen, and you're wrong at the top of your voice.